Imagine this. For 3,000 years, it sat there, hidden under the Egyptian sands, a secret locked away in stone. And then, in 1922, that seal was broken. And what was revealed was the single greatest archaeological find in all of human history, the tomb of the boy king, Tutankhamun.
So, when archaeologist Howard Carter and his patron, Lord Carnarvon, finally peered inside, they were just blinded by the glint of gold. An entire pharaoh's court, just frozen in time. It was this moment of pure, absolute triumph for science and for history. But, as it turns out, that triumph would soon be overshadowed by a much, much darker story.
13.
Yep, 13. That's how many people who were there at the opening died under mysterious circumstances not long after. The world's newspapers, of course, they went crazy, screaming about a pharaoh's curse, some kind of supernatural revenge coming from beyond the grave. But was it really a curse? Or was the truth something far stranger, buried in the scientific details of the tomb itself? Let's start our investigation. Okay, our investigation begins not with the spooky deaths, but with the tomb. Because from the moment Howard Carter stepped inside, he knew something just felt off. This did not look like the final resting place of a revered king. The team found this whole list of just baffling clues. Instead of a grand burial hall, it was this tiny, cramped room. He was buried miles away from his family, which for ancient Egyptians was a huge taboo. And get this, the coffin itself seemed to be secondhand. They literally had to saw off parts of it just to cram it inside the stone sarcophagus. Everything pointed to one thing: a sudden death and a burial that was completely rushed and improvised.
And just look at the contrast here. A pharaoh's tomb was meant to be this huge, reverent palace for the afterlife. Tutankhamen's? It felt more like a cluttered storage closet, just stuffed with hand-me-down goods. This wasn't just a little unusual, it was a profound break from everything they believed in.
So the tomb is already telling us that something totally unexpected happened. But the mummy of King Tut himself? Well, that would reveal a story far more shocking than anyone could have possibly imagined. And that brings us to clue number 2. All right, now we turn to the body of the king himself. And the evidence they've found here would present a puzzle that seemed to defy all logic. So first, we know that Tutankhamun wasn't some mighty, powerful ruler. His parents were actually brother and sister, so he was born frail. He had a clubfoot and had to walk with a cane his whole life. In fact, they found over 350 canes in his tomb. On top of all that, he suffered from malaria and brittle bone disease. He was, to put it lightly, a very vulnerable young man. But you know, all his physical problems were nothing compared to what the autopsy uncovered. His chest was absolutely crushed. There was this huge, weird incision running across his torso, and most bizarrely of all, his heart was gone. For ancient Egyptians, the heart was the seat of intelligence. It was essential for the afterlife. It was never removed. And then, they found the final, truly impossible clue. Forensic scientists made this just astonishing discovery. When they examined tiny fragments of the mummy's flesh, they found it had been burned. Not just damaged, we're talking literally cooked by intense heat after it was sealed inside its coffin. I mean, that sounds completely impossible, right? There were no tomb robbers, no signs of a fire. So how does a chemical reaction powerful enough to ignite a body happen all by itself, locked away in total darkness for 3 millennia? Well, the answer wasn't a curse, it was chemistry. And this is where modern science comes in to crack a 3,000-year-old cold case. The key to the burnt mummy, and really the entire mystery, lies in a fascinating and pretty rare phenomenon. It's called spontaneous chemical combustion. It's what happens when certain materials, under just the right conditions, can generate their own heat. You don't need a spark, you don't need a flame from the outside, they literally set themselves on fire. So how did this happen to King Tut? It all comes back to that rushed mummification. The priests used way too much flammable embalming oil. So when the coffin was sealed, all that oil began reacting with the oxygen that was trapped inside, creating this slow burn chemical reaction that just generated more and more heat, until finally, ignition. The mummy essentially cooked itself from the inside out. And suddenly, all those weird clues just lock right into place. The frail king suffers a catastrophic chariot accident. That explains the crushed chest and why the heart was destroyed. His body, left in the hot Egyptian sun, starts to decompose really fast, which forces that rushed, sloppy mummification with all the extra oils. He gets put into a borrowed tomb, and then, years later, the chemical time bomb that the embalmers left behind goes off.
So we've solved the mystery of the burnt mummy. But what about those 13 deaths? What about the curse that started this whole story in the first place?
Here's a number for you, 74.5. That was the average age of the scientists who supposedly died from the curse. 74.5, hardly the age of people being struck down in their prime.
And when you actually look at the facts, the curse just completely falls apart. Lord Carnarvon, the most famous victim, died of pneumonia, and he'd struggled with lung problems his entire life. And what about Howard Carter, the guy who actually breached the tomb? He should have been the first to go, right? Nope, he lived for another 16 years and died of natural causes at 64.
And here it is, the final nail in the coffin for the curse theory. Egyptologists all confirm it. The whole idea of a vengeful pharaoh's curse, like we see in the movies, it just wasn't part of ancient Egyptian belief. It was a modern invention, totally fueled by newspaper headlines. So, the science has solved the mystery. We know about the accident, the rushed burial, and the incredible chemical fire. We know the curse was just a media fabrication. So, the final question really isn't about what happened to King Tut, but why are we still so fascinated by the myth when the scientific truth is actually even more incredible?